Good afternoon, and this is the second in my series of World Mental Health Day 2020, and it's about people telling their stories. So my name's Emma Last, my company is Progressive Minds, and the lady that is with me is Shamaine Robinson. Shamaine, would you just share what you do?
What do? I talk a lot. I'm a business and marketing strategist. So I help businesses focus on what they need to do rather than what they think they should be doing to generate more money, more clients, more profit. Yeah, I love my job. I do love my job.
Me too. So, thank you ever so much for coming on and agreeing to share your story. So, we'll move on to that. So what's your story in relation to mental health?
Well, thank you very much for having me first. So what's my story with mental health? I come from a family of women who have always suffered from mental health issues. My grandmother was institutionalized back in the 1920s. I had my mum and my auntie are going to kill me for saying this. My mum and my auntie have both attempted suicide at some point. And it was kind of like a theme growing up. And I didn't appreciate really that how different it was, or how it was deemed to be different, and how it was just something that nobody really talked about. And then because it was happening. It wasn't a thing that was talked about in our family. You kind of knew it was going on, but our family's from Manchester, and it was kind of like you didn't talk about it. It was just your mum's in hospital again. Like, right, okay. And I never really saw anybody get better, or I never really saw anybody like get any treatment apart from being in and out of hospital all the time.
Yeah.
So then I didn't appreciate that. I understood that I was quite vulnerable as a child because my parents moved around a lot. My parents were publicans, and then they got divorced, and I pretty much went to like 13 schools in 11 years because we just moved around everywhere. And I didn't appreciate. I knew I was vulnerable, and I knew that I was up and down all the time, and people would just be like, "Oh, it's just Shamaine. Don't worry, she cries a lot, and gets upset at stupid things. She cries at adverts." And then I made it into the corporate world quite at a young age, at about the age of 18, because I moved to London to get away from like where we were. Well, we moved to Wales by then, and we moved to London. I then moved to London.
I was going to say, you're trying to get away from Manchester. That's not very far from me, is it?
Well, I didn't have a choice. My parents got divorced, and then all of a sudden my grandparents were announcing they were moving to South Wales. And before I knew it, I was living in South Wales. I was like, how did that happen? Because it literally happened overnight. It was like, within the space of like 4 weeks, we were gone. And I was just like, all right, how did that happen? Which was interesting because it was at a time when the Welsh really didn't like the English. So I was heavily bullied at school for being English, even though I'm not, because I'm British. I was actually born in Singapore. My father was a Royal Marine. So I'm not English, but I spoke with this funny accent from Manchester. I haven't got it now, but I spoke with this funny accent from Manchester, and everybody thought it was hilarious to take the mickey out of me. So I was always being bullied. And I think I understood from an early age that a bully is just somebody who has been bullied or treated badly, because I always became really good friends with my bullies afterwards. And people were just like, God, you're weird. And I'm like, yeah, well, I'm Shamaine, and I'm allowed to be weird. And then I moved to London because there was just not much happening in South Wales where I was. I couldn't see myself working in a factory for the rest of my life. Not that there's anything wrong with working in a factory, because there isn't. I was on bloody good money. But I just couldn't see myself sitting there for the next 40 years doing the same job. Didn't know the bottom was going to fall out of manufacturing, but hey ho. And ended up in London, and I ended up in corporate, and it was kind of this culture of, oh, you don't bring your troubles to work, and you don't talk about anything, and you don't, if your boss tells you off, go sit there crying. And it was, so in the early 80s, late 80s, early 90s, it was kind of like you don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And then I think I said to you a couple of days ago when we were having a chat that I worked in an HR department, and the people were encouraged to come and speak to me, and then we would manage them out. And I think at that point I realized that that wasn't right. We'd asked these people to be vulnerable. They were being vulnerable, and then we were managing them out of their jobs.
Right, yeah.
And then I suddenly became really aware of the fact that actually there's not that much support, and you're not supposed to talk about things. And then I ended up within the NHS system, because I did go to the doctors, and all they were interested in was giving me tablets.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget it. I was in a really serious accident in 2001, and the doctors prescribed me Ciroxac medication. And I've been taking it for about 8 weeks. I was on the tube going to work, and I was thinking, I was looking at everybody, and I was working out how I could kill them, and what I would do to them. And I was just like, all of a sudden something went off in my head, and I got off at Baker Street tube station, and I sat on the platform, and this guy came out. One of the transport people came over to me and asked if I was all right, because I clearly didn't look very well. And I said, I think I need to speak to the police now. So they brought a British Transport police officer to me, and I told him what was going on. And I think I was lucky because he probably would just have arrested me or anything. But I ended up at my doctor's and with him, and he sat with me until I saw the doctor. And the doctor was just like, "Oh, it's nothing. It's just the medication. And have you read the leaflet? And the leaflet says that you'll be prone to higher suicide tendencies and all that." And then about 6 weeks later, there was this program on TV about how all these people in America on Ciroxac were going around killing people because what the medication had done. So I went back to the doctor, and I just went, she went, "Yeah, but that's America." And I went, "It doesn't matter, it's the same tablet." And then I quickly learned that all the NHS were concerned about was keeping me on this medication, and that I had to try and come up with some kind of strategies that were going to help me.
Yeah.
That was the difficult. Back then, back in the early 20s, I make it sound like the 1920s. Back in the early 20s, 2000, back in the early 2000s, there just wasn't anything, because you just didn't. It wasn't mentioned. It wasn't talked about. It wasn't discussed. If you highlighted it, it would cost you your job. You could physically see friends moving away from you.
Mm-hmm.
But I was lucky in some respects, because I've been in a terrorist attack. So people kind of were like, "Well, Shamaine, she has been kind of blown up, isn't she? So and she's a bit weird to begin with." So yeah, and then it wasn't until probably 10 years ago, so I would have been 41 then, that I did start to get proper treatment. But the majority of it I've had to pay for. It's the NHS have labelled me now with something called treatment-resistant depression. I was like, WTF? I was like, what? And they're like, so when I looked it up, it basically means they've tried me on 3 different tablets and nothing works. I won't sign a document that says they'll let me mess around with my meds, so they won't speak to me. So I live home. So yeah, I don't think it's. I know it's genetic through my family. Yeah, I understand that there is obviously something in the brain which isn't working properly, and I think I know that I just need to manage it myself. Yeah, I need to understand the triggers, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So. And in terms of kind of your, are you working on that at the moment? Do you know, are there any patterns that you've kind of picked up on?
Yeah, if I suddenly start throwing myself into work and working stupid hours, that's me brushing everything under the carpet, and I need to recognise that. If I'm oversleeping, if I'm eating too much junk food, if I'm not drinking enough water, because water's a big one for me. Yeah. And if I'm crying at adverts. Yeah, if I start, what was I crying at the other day? I was crying. I was like, oh my God. My friend was sitting there looking at me going, I was just like, I'm emotional at the moment. I can't remember. Can't remember what it was. There was something on the news, and I was absolutely bawling my eyes out. And I was just, I feel so sorry for them. So yeah, when I start to do things like that, and actually when I stop taking the dog for a walk, and I want to go outside and not go outside, I know that's a big one for me, because I live on my own with a dog and a cat. So it's really, and the pandemic has meant that I can actually hide away. Yes, that doesn't help. Yeah. So while it ticks one box, it doesn't. I know it's not helping my mental health, if that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you? So in terms of you're aware of those triggers, how do you manage those things?
I try to do the reverse engineer everything. That I force myself to get up early. I force myself to drink. I force myself to eat. I have proper words with myself. Like, I do talk to myself quite a lot. I journal. It's actually it's not proper journaling. I just brain dump how I'm feeling, and then I never go back and read it.
Yeah.
I suppose normally I would reach out to a couple of people, but I'm finding at the moment that a lot of people they don't know where they are, so it's not as easy to reach out as what it was before, and it's not as easy to say to somebody, can we just go for a coffee or something? So that bit's a bit difficult. So the brain dumping thing helps, I think, massively.
Whatever, sometimes just getting everything out of your head, whatever it is. I find all writing or anything to kind of clear your mind.
Do you ever find when you're writing it, you're like, how stupid is this? In your head, you're going, really? It's just like,
mine's more like, it can sometimes be right. Well, I need to do that. It's like about changing the world. It's about changing the world. I need to do that. I need to do that. So sometimes, right, we'll write that down. Actually, and then sometimes it ends up turning into content that I then write as well. So it's quite interesting. It's like, well, could that actually help somebody if I turn that into something else? So sometimes it does. It comes out, or it then turns into something else.
That's true. Actually, sometimes I write some stuff down. I'm like, I should be, obviously your field is mental health, but sometimes I think to myself, actually, I was told by somebody about 2 weeks ago that I should talk more about my story and because that would help. But my corporate background kicks in. It's like, oh, you don't talk about that kind of stuff. I'm always talking about myself, but if I align it with my business, it's like, oh, I'm not quite sure about that one.
It is a fine line, isn't it? In terms of, it shouldn't be a fine line, but it sometimes is. So, you're someone that's you've lived with it for a long time, and actually, you'll probably have times where you feel great and times when you're not as great. And but I think, I just obviously interviewed Claire, and one thing she was saying is that just really recognizing that it's not always like this. It always changes.
It does always change. And I think I've done a lot of for years I've followed personal development and mindset work and all that and a lot of energy work and stuff like that. And you've got to be, it took me a long time to realize that the thoughts that are going through my head are not real. They're just what I'm thinking. And some of them are there. Some of them are there to protect the brain, because we've got this ancient part of our brain which nobody can ever retrain or anything, because we've just got the reptilian part of the brain that we just don't know much about. Well, they do, but scientists don't talk an awful lot about it. And that reptilian brain is supposed to be to protect us. So some of these thoughts that are going through my head, they're just there to protect. They think they're protecting me, whereas actually it's 2020 and it's not protecting me. It's adding to the problems, and I've just got to recognise that that's not. It's just a thought and let it pass by and not cling to it as if I wake up in the morning and I feel like absolute poo and I don't want to get up. Classic. I think it was the day I did the work with you. I felt horrendous. I woke up, I was like, I really can't do this. Got to message Emma. And then my logical brain was going, Emma's paid you. You need to show up. So I literally dragged myself out of bed, got into the shower. But within about half an hour before I started speaking to you, I felt 100% better because I'd shown up.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'd stayed in bed, I would have still felt like crap the way I was feeling. So just so simple, showing up, doing the basics. So showing up, having a shower, get dressed, having something to eat, sitting at my desk, writing a to-do list, focusing, like thinking, what's Emma going to turn out? I kind of knew what you were going to ask me in some respects, but like what else is she going to cover? And and not giving myself the time pressure. It's kind of like, I'll just let Emma talk and we'll get to the end of it.
And obviously not a problem at all, is it?
No. I think most people are like, are you ever going to shut up, Shamaine?
combination, us two. But anyway.
Well, yeah. Well, that webinar we were on the other week got to 9:45. I was like, ladies, can you like just go to bed, because I need to go to bed now. I think if I logged back on, maybe somebody's still talking on it. But yeah, it's just sometimes, it's recognizing that actually the thoughts that are going through my head when I'm telling myself that I can't do this, or I've been triggered by, especially with the noise on social media at the moment. You see a post and it spirals you straight away. Oh, I could never be like, oh, Claire Stevens. I see a post from Claire Stevens. I'm like, how can I write content like Claire Stevens? And then I don't write anything. And it's like, it's just Claire. And Claire's really good at writing content. So it's like, don't let that trigger you, you know? Yeah.
It's that awful comparisonitis thing, isn't it? That many people suffer from. But it often creates blocks. And sometimes it's just trying to work out why have we got those blocks, and also acknowledging, you know, that our strengths might not be in that area, but our strengths are in other areas, and actually, right, come on, let's focus on our strengths rather than, you know, on those areas that perhaps, you know, we're not as strong at, and, you know, maybe we can pay people like Claire to do those bits for us, or whatever. So, you know, or actually, do you know what? I really want to get good at that. So I know I'm not great at it, but I'm going to work on that.
I think one of the other things as well that I've realized over time is that if I'm not feeling good about something, it will show up more. The more I think about it and the more thoughts I go in my head, the more I will see it. So on days like that, there are days which are really good, and there are days which are just copable. So I'm just like bubbling along, and there are other days which is just like, I can't do this. So on days like that, I just don't I put my phone to one side and I don't even pick it up for 3 days. It's like, don't go near social media, don't go near something, don't touch something that you know is going to trigger you. And if that is so the trigger could be anything from chocolate biscuits. Salty caramel biscuits at the moment. I can't eat one. I have to eat the whole packet, and they're like 150 calories each. So that's 1,000 calories gone before you know it, innit? So it's like, but a lot of my friends say to me, a lot of my friends have said to me over the pandemic how much they've drunk at home. And I don't drink in the house. And I think it's because two reasons. I think it's because I was brought up in a pub in the 70s. Yeah. But I also think I'm on my own, and if I started drinking, would I ever stop? Yeah. And who would know? Because I'm on my own, and I've worked around people who can hide it really well. And I'm like, I've got enough problems going on in my life without adding to it. So like my grand, bless her, she's gone now, and she would always say to the family, she was so proud of the fact that when I went to London in the 80s, I didn't get into prostitution and drugs. She's been over now. She's won Blackpool. And I didn't quite understand what she meant until I had my own child. And I was kind of like, actually, I could. It was all. I was working in an environment. I was working in the city of London, for God's sake. Everybody was living on coke, and I was just like, my friends were like, we were going out on the weekend, and most of my friends were on ecstasy and stuff like that. And I was just looking at them, thinking, I can be out of control without doing any of that. Why would I do that? But then I understand how some people who have a mental health issue would levitate towards that. Yeah. You know, so because my son tried drugs a couple of years ago, because his mental health isn't brilliant because he's autistic, and obviously he's got my genes, bless him. And he tried drugs a couple of years ago, not hardcore drugs, just weed. But he realized after about 18 months the damage it was doing to him. Yeah. So I said to him, I'm really proud of the fact that you recognize that. Yeah. So now he doesn't put himself in environments where he knows that's going to be on the table or part of that social group that he's got to do that. So yeah, I still have a problem with salty caramel biscuits though. Do you know what?
It's really interesting because often it's that nurture thing, isn't it? So if you think about it, so right back to as soon as you're born, pretty much it's like, oh, you're crying, oh, we stick something in your mouth, don't we? Yeah. You know, it's like we feed you, or we stick something in your mouth, stick a dummy
Shut
in.
you up.
Yeah. So, you know, and ultimately it's like, you know, it's that comfort thing, isn't it? So that having that feeling of something, you know, in your mouth, eating, well, it's, and, you know, it's an association of being nurtured. It's comfort.
Yeah.
So we've got all that to contend with.
Yeah.
And often that's why we potentially then, okay, well, I need some comfort. What's the easiest thing to get? Chocolate. And obviously you get all the sugar rush that goes with it as well, and gives you that little bit of, you know, that feeling of a bit energy boost and whatever. But it just, obviously it's just not sustained, is it? That's the other thing. But, you know, there's many people that, you know, that have, you know, what we call vices, aren't they? You know, their ways are, you know, of, you know, the ways of kind of coping with certain things, and people turn to different ways to deal with different things in terms of mental health. And actually, in terms of food, eating more, eating less, it's really, really common.
It can swing both ways on anything, can't it? And this advice is just a coping mechanism. And I think if you realise that, because I was a comfort eater for years, and a secret eater as well. I don't do it now because it's kind of, I know that I'm lying to myself. So, but it's you.
Well, you've told us all that you like those salted caramel biscuits, so you've definitely not a secret eater.
Well, I know I'm in trouble if I haven't moved off the settee all day, but I will get dressed at 9 o'clock at night before the co-op closes to go and get a packet of salted caramel biscuits. And as I'm driving there, I'm thinking to myself, what are you doing? It's like,
no, we not wine, I suppose.
Well, yeah, and I love the way that my brain will say to me, well, it's just a treat because you deserve it. I was like, that's like this, so, because honestly, the conversation inside my head is, Brene Brown said it to me. Brene Brown said it on her podcast the other day. Brene Brown said, inside her head's like the Wild Wild West. I was like, oh my God, I'm so with you there. I just you really don't know what, especially from a networking meeting, you really do not want to know what's going through my head. And those people on the tube that day were probably very grateful that I got off, because that was just, I'll never forget that day. I'll never forget looking at how I could kill every single person in different ways. And I was not, it was kind of like, well, I'm going to stab you, going to strangle you, going to do like this.
But it's just like, this is the thing, isn't it? I was talking with Claire about, you know, rational thoughts, you know, what you deem as rational, getting to a point where you deem things as rational, and actually, you know, it's our brains almost convinces us that things are, you know, are completely rational. And obviously that medication had such a massive effect that I'm glad I've never had to experience that.
There's quite a lot of programs over the years now on Suroxac, and if you hear of a mass murder, if you hear of a murder where a husband's gone into a house and killed his whole family, normally somewhere in that article it will say he was on Suroxac. There was a guy who killed his whole family a couple of years ago. There was a teenager that went into a school and started shooting everybody, but they tracked the change in his behavior, and it all happened over it. He was obviously suffering from mental health issues because they want to put him on they give Suroxac to everybody in America. Donald Trump's probably on it, and now I'm going to be sued because this is like awful. I tell you go. There's a symbol for it.
Not anymore, right? Okay. So, all right. So, what advice could you share with anyone that feels that they might need some help right now?
Right. So the first thing I think you need to do is you need to have an honest conversation with yourself. I think admitting it and saying it out loud that there is something, and that admitting it could be anything from I'm just not feeling okay to there is something wrong. Admitting it and owning it is probably the first biggest step, even just to yourself. And then you need to find somebody safe to reach out to. To say, there's something not quite right here, and that person doesn't tend to be your best friend or a family member or somebody like that. It could be somebody like you that they've met. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I've never tried the Samaritan's helpline, but my son swears by it. So like even something like the Samaritan, because like obviously there's been big talk about the male mental health and the suicide rate around and stuff like that. So the fact that he was prepared to pick up the phone and phone the Samaritans tells me that he's admitted that something wasn't right. But I've never tried the Samaritan's helpline.
Yeah.
I think it's because I've gone through therapy so much. I'm so sick of talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So so identifying it to yourself, reaching out to somebody, and staying off Google. Stay off Google. Just self-care. I think self-care is a good one. Just
when you say stay off Google, do you mean like because if you Google your symptoms and stuff, you'll come up with all sorts? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Yeah, you'll within half an hour you'll be planning how you're going to attempt to, do you know what I mean? Google's going to escalate it really quickly.
Yeah.
And you might actually think that you've got stage 4 cancer by the time you've finished reading it, and you haven't. There is something not quite right in the chemistry of the brain, and there's scientists all over the world studying the brain, and they'll never really understand the brain just because of the complexity of it. So do some self-care, because we tend to put ourselves last as well. And even just something really stupid of I had a bath, or I had a shower and I got dressed, or I actually had 3 square meals that day, or I drank I drank 2 liters of water, or I got out into nature and I walked the dog. Because just think, when was the last time you did that kind of thing? You might not want to tell. If you reach out to somebody, you might not want to talk to them. You just might want them to. I think it's Winnie the Pooh. There's a quote on Winnie the Pooh with Piglet, and it's just like, I'll just walk next to you.
Yeah.
You don't want anybody. We don't. 9 times out of 10, for me, and I could be, Emma, you might correct me on this. 9 times out of 10 for me, when I see people who have got serious mental health issues, the last thing they want is somebody to charge in and help them, because the actual reaction is somebody will go, do this, do that, call the doctor. It's like, whoa, don't. I just want to sit here and acknowledge that I don't feel okay. And I don't want you to say anything. I just want you to sit with me. Because sometimes I think a lot of it is loneliness.
It's like missing human connection.
Because you can be, I say to people, when people say to me, I don't understand mental health, I say, have you ever been in a room and felt lonely? A room full of people. You've been at a party, a wedding, your own birthday party, for God's sake, and it's that moment where you go, I really don't want to be here, I don't feel okay. And that is, to me, that's mental. That's part of mental health. You can be in a really busy room and still be really lonely.
Like that lack of connection. It's like a misconnection, isn't it? It's almost like you want to be connected, but you can't feel connected at that point.
And your brain's going, oh, just be happy, you're at a wedding, or just be happy, it's your birthday, everybody's there for you, or just be happy, because it's like, no, it's like there was just even at that point, just recognize that something is just off. And that, do you know what? It's okay to feel like that, because we're not being joined by my dog now. We're not meant to be happy all the time. Because if we were happy all the time, somebody said it to me yesterday. Somebody said, have you noticed in NLP that they want to take the pain threshold down to 0? And I said, yeah. Well, that's not realistic. They said, because you need to understand an element of pain to understand that something is wrong. And it's the same, and it's the same with mental health. You need, there needs to be a trigger. There needs to be something that triggers you to show you that actually things aren't okay. And it could just be that sense of, get me out of this room. I don't want to be with these people. I want to be on my own.
I suppose it's with a lot of it. I mean, I find I work with people that are very much on their recovery journey, and they might have sought help or it's not something that's been in their lives, and they're looking at ways that they can kind of make changes to their lifestyle or start to understand themselves more to be able to have impact on how they feel. So I suppose there's lots of things that you can do, that you can work on yourself, and actually, and it's different for different people as to what works for you, isn't it? You know, so I'm different at different points in your life, but I think it's like you said, it's like admitting it, having an awareness that actually I'm not feeling great. Right, what do I need to work on? When I felt rubbish last time, what were the things that I did to make myself feel better? You know, and doing those things, and then potentially trying something new when you're strong enough to try something new to work out what you do, you know, what works for you. Okay, so why do you think days such as World Mental Health Day are important?
Because at last it feels like people can talk about it.
Yeah.
Under the label of World Mental Health Day. So even if they're just talking about it for that one day, that's damn sight more than they were doing 15 years ago. And even if that just gives you permission on that day to kind of say, you know, this isn't good for me. The more education around the subject, the more people will admit that something is wrong. And something isn't right. And the more it brings the conversation to the mainstream table, the more will be done, because it's even in the last 20 years, it's changed so much. And I think the fact that, for me, especially around men's mental health, one of the big things the big difference I saw was when Prince William and Prince Harry both started talking about the death of their mother. Because it was I know those who aren't old enough to remember to have remembered that it was a national, worldwide outpouring of grief when this woman died. And then we all like bawling our eyes out because the two boys were walking behind the coffin. And now, you know, they've started a mental health charity. And I know there's issues there, but we won't go there. But they've started a mental health charity. So like, if the elite can recognize, because they are, even in, you know, in the world of Aristotle, I can't say it, the different levels, you know, they're royalty. So if the royalty can turn up and say it's okay not to be okay, then we have a right, especially as a parent. If you're a parent or you've got other people who depended on you, you need to be able to say things aren't good. Because I think I have a moral duty to generations that are going to come after me, to show that we were prepared to do stuff. Because the culture in the 80s, and my mum's culture, you just didn't talk about it. My grandmother's culture, she was institutionalized for it. My culture was you just put your head down and got on with it, which led to burnt out, fatigue, chronic fatigue syndrome, and a worse mental health state than I ever had. So hopefully, you know, in the years to come, it's gonna kids in school are gonna be able to say at the age of 5, I don't feel well today. And that's going to be okay. A teacher's going to put their arms around them when we're allowed and say, it's okay not to be okay.
And just to be able to talk, because often it's that, you know, being able to talk and just get how you're feeling out, or, you know, like we said, in terms of writing stuff down is a big, really big help. Okay, well, thank you ever so much, Shamaine. I'm so grateful for you coming on and doing it. And I'll be talking to other people over the next few days. So join me for my next in the series. Thank you ever so much, Shamaine.
Thank you.